we don't say no. We feel like, I'm seeking to be good. I'm seeking to manifest good in the world. So if you come to me and you ask me to contribute to your cause, I should, because that's a good cause. And then if you come to me and you want me to do this, or if I get pulled in that direction, or tomorrow the world has an emotional surge about this one thing, I should walk down that path too, and that path too, and that path too. And you try to be everything to everybody, at the end of the day, you're just not going to be able to be fully manifesting what it is that your unique gifts are.
Hitendra, welcome.
Thank you, Jason. It's a pleasure to be with you and our audience here today.
It's great to have you, and I was very attracted to the title of your book, Inner Mastery, Outer Impact, which I think that concept to many people, many of our listeners, I'm sure, is very attractive. So at the highest level, I know you dive deep into this in the book. How can we achieve inner mastery?
One main thought I want to offer is that it is more something that we are invited to awaken to rather than achieve. It's realization that at the very center of our being already lies a wealth of love and wisdom and joy and peace that any or all of us are really rightfully so hungering for. And so many times we turn that lens and that attention outward to seek it in worldly consumption and glory and connections and all of that. And yet it's an ever-present core of who we are within. And so how do we achieve inner mastery? There are different paths up the same mountaintop, to that highest peak of human potential. I am personally very, very inspired by the idea that, each of us is being invited by life to find our path, to find our teacher, our teaching, our approach, that there are certain laws of human nature that ultimately govern, what it is that takes us towards our core and what kinds of things takes us away from it. And at the same time, it doesn't have to be a singular path, a singular teaching that is in fact relevant and right for all of us. And I really loved the way Mother Teresa once said. She said, I love all faiths, and I am in love with my faith. And so this idea of both finding the path that is right for you, and at the same time being very appreciative and almost cheering of those who are earnestly on their own quest to discover their core, to pursue inner mastery, and doing it perhaps with a variant of or a different path and in a different position and time in where they are on it is itself, I think, a part of the journey, to recognize those diversity of paths that get us there. Now, my attempt in this book has been to seek to offer a few of those paths by connecting them with the energies that we activate within us. And there are at least 4 of those that I think, to me, I found an opportunity to research, codify, teach, and ultimately offer in the book.
So you mentioned finding one's path, the power of the journey. Let's for a moment talk about your breakthrough moment, which ultimately led to this book.
It starts at a very early stage. I was, I think, just about 10 years old when I got very drawn to what is life about, and what is existence, and what is my connection with humanity beyond just my family, and what about the universe? Those stars out there, I feel like they're speaking to me, and I rightfully feel like I'm I want to see the whole universe as my home, and how can one really experience that? And so these questions would come up, and I was really fortunate to have grown up in a culture like India, where these are questions that are not in any way strange to explore and ask and discover. And there've been truth seekers through the ages across all cultures, but India has been in some ways especially enriched by some of those discoveries over the centuries and millennia. And so I was able to discover scriptures and teachers, and had conversation like this with my parents and others, and saw them themselves go on a spiritual journey. So that was one, I would say, a very pivotal shift and moment for me, just around the age of 10, getting to start to access a set of kind of insights and ideas more from the mystic traditions, from not just India but around the world. But then that was by itself only an initial stirring, I would say. And it got intensified by the time I was about 17, when I went to an ashram in India and kind of like wanted to give up on the material existence and really get deeply steeped in what the spiritual teaching was, of that yoga based kind of, ashram path that I was connected with, the monastics that I was connected with, the monks. And yet the pull of the world was there, and I really wasn't ready yet to give it all up. And so I went back, into the world and pursued the, dreams of success and grandeur and kind of accomplishment and ambition that, any or all of us, are invested in. And so it then took really another about 17 years. Really, I had to live another cycle of 17 years through before, in my mid 30s, I finally reached that point where I was feeling quite, in a sense, unfulfilled from within while being very enriched from without. So from the outside, engaging and achieving, the usual kinds of things about the schools I'm going to and the profession and the organizations I'm working for and all of that. But it's feeling increasingly so from within, a sense of just growing dryness, of spirit and heart, in terms of what I felt I was born for and I wanted to discover, and yet I wasn't doing. So I finally, bit the bullet and started to commit to a meditation practice that had been introduced to me very early, but that I hadn't really been able to make a commitment to pursue. And once I got there in my mid 30s, made it a daily pursuit, and over time grew, my commitment to it. It's been the greatest blessing of my life, and it's transformed so much, not just of my connection with my own core and myself from within, but really given me a whole new frame through which to experience life, engage with life, and offer up my energies and whatever it is I can to be of service and support to the world. So yes, of a human journey still being made and pursued, but within that, this awakening of something quite special from within, that meditation has been a key for me to unlock.
Well, what's so interesting about you is you teach at Columbia Business School, and and hearing you describe your experience, you're talking about meditation. In the book, you talk about transcendence. You're talking about purpose, wisdom, love, self-realization, growth. I haven't heard you mention, nor did I see in the book, the P&L, EBITDA, all the, accounting, and I know you teach different type of course at the business school, but, I think it's important to note, on some level, you mentioned pursuing the things that everyone, is pursuing. And like, okay, I'm going to try to get that thing. I'm going to try to get that raise. I want to get that job. And there's nothing wrong about goal setting and trying to, attain some level of success, whether it's material or however you choose to define success. But it seems like people end up unhappy and kind of lost. And I'm going to come back to, I think, the why is something, you lead with. You talk about these core energies, and one of the first ones in the book you discuss is purpose. Purpose with a capital P. If I go to the why we're unhappy, or whether we're chasing the right or wrong goal, or we have the right or wrong values or the relationships, it's, to me, so much comes back to purpose. So let's start with purpose, and how should we all think about and approach purpose with a capital P?
I love that distinction, the small and capital P. Yeah, I mean, at some level, it's the holy grail, right? I mean, any or all of us are searching for, a greater sense of meaning and fulfillment, and a real purpose to what it is that we are embarked on in life. And it's becoming increasingly so, I think, a very expressed need out there. And yet, I think there are some myths and misunderstandings about it that I'd like to offer up for us to consider and challenge. In our path to purpose. One thing, for instance, in my case was early on when I got very invested in the idea of leading a more meaning-oriented life, a more consciously chosen kind of direction in life. I thought it was about five or six or seven or eight different things, and I had to kind of like balance them and do them all, and this was going to be my life, and this was going to be my trade-offs, and then I meet this one of my mentors, and he kind of like makes this shape with me of like putting his arms together in the form of a triangle. And he asked me, Hitendra, let me ask you this: what's the one thing that you really want out of life? And I was stunned. Like, what do you mean by one, sir? Like, how about six or seven or eight? There's something to do with my family, something to do with my profession, something to do with. And he just paused and smiled and he said, just think about it. Don't have to answer this question right now. And then he made the shape with his arm like a triangle. And at that point, I didn't understand. But over time I did. And one thing I realized is that there is incredible power when we ultimately are able to distill the direction in our life to that one thing, not to that bucket list of a checklist of things that we want to experience over the course of a life or we want to do over the course of a life, etc. But ultimately that one thing. And some people feel like, oh, wait a second, but if it's that one thing, then what are you saying? Are you going to sacrifice your health? Are you going to sacrifice your friendships, your family, your profession? What are isn't that an imbalanced thing? Just one thing? But that's the wrong way of thinking about it. Because when I say the one thing, I don't mean that you have to, eliminate your responsibilities and engagement with these different silos, of the things that you engage with in life, these relationships, these people, your own self, your growth and other things. But it's that there's a one integrative thread through all of that. And in fact, it starts to dissolve these silos. And all the moments of your life start to be imbued with a certain, kind of fusion of meaning that is coming from that one thing. I'll give you an example. Viktor Frankl, he's a beautiful man, right? He, as I'm sure you know, right, wrote Man's Search for Meaning, and often he was out there helping people realize that their suffering, their angst, everything was coming from a lack of clarity about what it is that their life stood for and what their meaning was. And then he was asked once, he was asked, Dr. Frankl, you're doing so much to help us, find our meaning. What is the meaning of your life? What's the purpose of your life? And he smiled and he looked at him, and he said, my purpose is to help you find your purpose, and so everything that he did was informed and guided by that one central ethos, and so that's one idea, which is like to be on this almost like romantic, like sort of, you know engagement with life, to ask yourself, what is it that I'm meant to pursue? What is it that I'm meant to choose? And what is that one direction that in this finiteness of my life I'm meant to invest and direct all my energy towards? That's one thing. Now, the other thing I would offer, though, is that we have to all be very cautious. We have to be very cautious because the risk we run is that we go down the path of Alexander the Great. He is considered great, justifiably so in some regard, because at his time, the currency of greatness was how much territory you capture and you rule over. And he was the greatest of the greats, from that regard. I mean, among the Greeks, I mean, basically, at that point, he conquered as much of the known world as there was. And why did he do that? Why did he do that? Because his mother had told him that he was a very, very special human being. He was born of immaculate conception. There was a bolt of lightning that struck her womb, and he was actually, the son not of a king, but of this God Zeus, and he was meant to rule over the world. So that becomes his framework. That becomes his core belief system, and it guides him, and it shapes him, and it directs him to his destiny in that life. And yet, at some point, he gets to encounter these yogis in India, and he starts to see how simple their life is, and yet how profound and beautiful and liberated they are. And he has a couple of soul-searching conversations with one of their leaders, and it really moves and stakes and stirs him from within. And it reminds him of his conversations with his teacher Aristotle, from some time back when he was in Greece and he was growing up. And yet he is just so pulled by that hunger and that expectation of people around him to continue to espouse that one purpose of his, which is to rule over, that he wasn't able to actually make a significant change. And then, just a couple of years, from that encounter with the yogis, he ended up, getting to fall sick and dying. And then within a few years, his empire collapsed, because it really wasn't, kind of really built with any real solidity of a foundation. And I offer that up because you and I and all of us, right? We ultimately are fueled by our beliefs. I call them like your bedrock beliefs. And our sense of purpose will ultimately arise from what those beliefs are. And the more we engage with the hard questions, the ones that science can perhaps really not give us full insight and information on, that logic can not fully answer for us, that have to come from a deeper felt place within. Questions like, what's my relationship with the universe, and why do good things happen to bad people, and what happens after death, and things like that. The more we engage with those questions, wrestle with them, and come up to some clarity for our own selves, about our bedrock beliefs like those, the more we will be guided to our true purpose, rather than a blindsided purpose where we may have gone down a certain path and then only to awaken at some point, perhaps, to the realization, oh my God, like everything I've been pursuing has been based on a foundation that I am now challenging and questioning and wondering if actually those were the things that made life worthy or not. So anyway, so that we could speak more. Of course, the book goes into 5 stages of getting to purpose, from purely being stirred to actually going on a search to getting to define and then focus and ultimately fuse it with your purpose. Those are the 5 stages. But for now, I thought maybe, I don't know what you think.
Yeah, well, I definitely I love that you're focusing on purpose, and I definitely want to walk through the 5 stages with you, because there's one area. There's so much to dive into the book. I think that's the one area we want to spend time on. But something I've always been curious about, I obviously I feel a strong sense of purpose. I love my work. There was a long path, a long entrepreneurial, well, maybe not long, you know, depending on how you view time, but it was almost like a decade entrepreneurial path to get to mindbodygreen. And then years later, in the beginning, was unclear whether it was not going to be successful. So it took a while, took a minute, to say the least. But are there some people that just kind of don't feel that calling, don't ask those questions, and that they just kind of, go along, do their thing, go to work, get a paycheck, support their family, and there's nothing wrong with that, and enjoy watching sports and or whatever it might be, and that's it? Do you think some people are hardwired differently with regards to their purpose, or do those people end up later in life regretting maybe choices they make, or are they just wired differently? Are we all different there? Do we all have that innate yearning for more, and we're just not tapping into it? What's your take?
It's a great question. I do think that there are lots of people who are, in that stage that comes even before the stirring. I don't even consider it one of the 5 stages of finding purpose, and so I offer in my book, a description of that stage as just, lying even prior. Let's call it stage 0 before you get to stage 1, where you're stirred. You're stirred, and something is happening, and you're looking and seeking now because you feel like there's got to be something more than what meets the eye. But that stage before is what I call the cruising stage, right? And the cruising stage is exactly what you described. You're waking up every morning, going through the motions of the day and the way you and others around you are used to, and then expecting to just like keep things there, and just live that life. And then of course sometimes a shock can come, to the system, or just the ravages of aging or something, and the loss and slowing down of life that it leads to, which can at times open us up to new reflections and revelations. It may be that actually we still don't awaken all the way, perhaps even to our cemetery or grave. But that is okay. I mean, that's a community of folks who just never arrived, at that stage of stirring. And I think, that said, when I talk to at least, the executives and students in my class, I find that most of them relate very well to the idea of stirring, right? Which is the first stage. That from time to time, they do feel a certain like whisper from within, a certain hunger or desire from within. Maybe they've watched a really inspiring movie, or, taken a walk in nature, or spoken to somebody who's very mission oriented, or just otherwise reflected on, how their career and life is going, and feeling like, what, here I was thinking that I'll be at the peak of joy, satisfaction, whatever, but I'm still seeking, I'm still searching, something isn't fully fulfilled yet. Maybe this path is not going to, permanently, sustainably get me there. And so that sense of stirring, I do find quite consistently is there with at least the people that I'm engaging with, right? Now, how many of us can really seize that bull by the horns and really make it a very conscious pursuit of like, okay, what else is there to my life than what meets the eye, and that what I'm being expected of and asked about from my family and others. Now that's a conscious choice and a choosing we have to take on. And some will invest much more in it, and with much more passion, more courage, more curiosity than others will. And if you do, then from there on, the breakthroughs start to come. Insights, guidance, perhaps a teacher, perhaps a role model, examples of others that you're drawn to, stirrings from within that guide you and inform you as to, maybe it's time to walk away from certain things in life. Maybe I should experiment with this, and let's see how fulfilled I get if I do X versus Y. And once you get there, then you're now in the, if you want to call it, the grip, the grip of this beautiful force of purpose that is making you realize that actually there's more fulfillment, there's more joy, there's more richness that I'm getting from anchoring myself and my pulse from within than I do from just the traditional trappings of material success in life.
I also don't want to not cruising. There are definitely many days where I say to myself, "Man, I just want to want to cruise for a while. I got too much purpose. I'm working too hard. I just want to, cruising is very appealing to me right now. I want a little bit more of that." Uh, but I always have been curious, about purpose, and when I think of misconceptions around purpose, you don't necessarily have to quit your job, start a company, leave and go to Tibet and visit the Dalai Lama. You don't necessarily have to do something big and bold to find purpose. Purpose can be cultivated in the day to day, in your everyday life without changing much.
Yeah, I mean it's a beautiful observation and a very liberating one, right? For so many of us who are deeply committed to also serving our family, meeting our financial goals, and are just by circumstances thrown into certain contexts and situations, have certain training, have certain value that we can offer the world, and we feel entrapped in that, and yet we have this purity of heart and purpose that wants us to perhaps do more than what we think. Let's say, for example, the commercial enterprise we're working for is perhaps like putting out there. And so to that end, I want to share a story, right? And so um, Gandhi had in his early 20s gone to London, picked up an education as a barrister in law, and then come back to India. And when he came back, there was this gentleman called Ray Chand that he encountered in Mumbai. And this Ray Chand became like a very captivating role model for Gandhi, for the manner in which he seemed to express some deeply, spirit driven qualities. He had a certain steadiness, he had a certain centeredness, a certain capacity to transcend and look beyond, just the ordinary everyday humdrum of life and all of that stuff. And this guy I'm talking about, Ray Chand, was actually just about 2 years older to Gandhi, and he was a diamond merchant. So he was in this, you know, kind of store in India, in Mumbai, basically transacting in jewelry. But while doing that, he seemed to exude this aura, this inner charisma, this capacity to really express his core in a way that really, on a lifelong basis, really captivated Gandhi. When he went later to South Africa and started to go deeper into his own spiritual discovery and his, pursuit of purpose, he would often write to Ray Chand, get letters back from him to guide him a little bit on these deeper questions in life. And so, if somebody who's in a jewelry store as a diamond merchant being able to actually exude something which is so much more than purely the material and is able to stir the hearts of someone as perceptive as, this future Mahatma, then who are you and I to say, like, no, in my position where I am and what I'm meant to do and all that right now, it's so constrictive, it's restrictive. How can I really truly express my core, where I am? So again, that doesn't give you a formula for how to do it. And the book goes a little bit more into how to map your values to your role, in life and in work and parenting and other roles you play, and find a way to kind of express your essence in any or all of those roles. But I just wanted to offer up through that example of Raychand that the opportunity is there for any or all of us to be true to ourselves wherever life has placed us.
And let's talk a little bit about the stages, if you will, in cultivating purpose.
Happy to. So, as we have already spoken about, the cruising stage is where one is just kind of going through the motions of life, very satisfied and pleased and comfortable, or getting frustrated or disappointed here and there, but fundamentally not willing to question that there's anything more to life than just what meets our eyes sensorily and materially. And then we get to the stirring, and that stirring is that first stage of the five. And stirring could come from a shock to the system, perhaps a personal loss or a setback, or it could just be literally a calling, an awakening from within of something. One of my students went through one of these awakening moments where she just came back once from school and told her mom that very day, Mom, look at this picture. This is a cancer cell. It's a smart cell, and I'm going to outsmart it. I'm going to be a cancer doctor. And she's grown up very much to be an oncologist. She has done some incredible research to eliminate, the risk of, fatal, outcomes from certain forms of cancer, and is just doing beautiful work, out there. So incredible, right? Like, as somebody who was in middle school and kind of knew, what that calling was for her from within. But then for many of us, there are moments where we get certain inklings, certain pulls, and in those moments, we feel like there's something more. I'm deeply valuing something, or I'm deeply pained about something, and we may not be paying attention to it. And so over time, if we start to awaken to paying attention to those things and connecting those dots, they might lead us to a little bit more of information and guidance and insight as to what perhaps life is inviting uniquely for us to express as a purpose. So that's the stirring stage. Then you get to searching, and searching can be partly through connecting those inner dots, like we just spoke about, partly through studying and reading the scriptures or lives of role models that we're very drawn to, talking to people who we are very drawn to, the kind of values they express, the kind of purpose they have. And so a series of both inner introspections and outer explorations can ultimately take us to a place where, more texture is coming to bear for us as to what it is that we are more drawn to as the core beliefs and the values and the direction that we think give meaning, to our life. From that second stage of search, we then come to the third stage of define. And in the define stage, as the search starts to yield benefits, we start to actually, choose for ourselves and codify for ourselves very consciously, not on the basis purely of inheriting something from our parents or, our social system or our school or the organization that we are part of or the friend circle we're in, but choosing consciously for ourselves. What are the things we stand for? And I found there that it's very important to see that as an ever evolving level of understanding of that relationship between you and the universe. Because, as an example, which I share in the book, I was very drawn to nonviolence very early on. But my understanding of what it truly means to be nonviolent in a practical way in the world has been very much evolutionary, over the years. I first thought it was purely about, like, I don't want to, just get into physical brawls with other boys in school. But then it became something more than that. It became more also about toning down the, impulse at times to engage in emotional violence, hurting somebody, or saying or doing something that has an emotional impact on the other person that is negative. But then I came to a point where I realized that actually violence can also just happen in our thoughts, in just the unnecessary ways. And at times we criticize people, deprecate people, look down on people, judge people. Gandhi really warned us that that was, in fact, the seeds of violence came from, the very thoughts that we silently harbor in our own minds. And then it went beyond that to a place where I realized that it's not just about thoughts, emotions, and actions. Sometimes there are situations where you have to do it. You have to lay somebody off, and you have to have a hard conversation with somebody. In the immediate moment it might emotionally cause them some pain, but for a higher purpose, for the sake of the team or the organization or the family or their own ultimate long-term welfare, you're going to have that conversation. You're going to make that decision. And then yet again, I found in the Lincolns and the Gandhis who had to be thrust into those moments where they had to make some hard calls like that, they were striving to do them with so much love and care and sensitivity that they could minimize the amount of damage, that it did to the other party emotionally or physically or what have you. And so ultimately, my definition of nonviolence today is that thou shalt, I shall, strive to my ultimate, to in thought, speech, or action, emotionally or physically, never harm anybody else. And if for the sake of a higher purpose, I have to sometimes engage in that, I ought to do it, in a way that minimizes that harm. I should really strive to do it in a way that minimizes that harm. And if I, stumble and fall, which I will from time to time, then I should be, willing to apologize and adjust and change my approach. And so, who knows what my definition of nonviolence will be 5 years from now, but that's the evolution I've gone through over the last, about 20, 30 years since I've been introspecting on this. So that's the third stage. Defining, it's a very vibrant stage, a very active stage. It's not just a simple black and white, write five things down and then you made it. It's ever evolving. Then you get to focusing, and that's the fourth stage. And in focusing, in some ways, the key there is to know that you can't be everything to everybody at the same time. You can't be good in all the ways that you want to all the time. You're going to have to make some trade-offs. You're going to have to make some calls. You're going to have to say no to lots of things in the service of your purpose. And so, what are the things in life that you're willing to give up in order to gain so much more from that fulfillment you get from the dedication to your values and your purpose? Perhaps it's, at times dialing down on certain relationships, perhaps dialing down on certain commitments, certain hobbies, being open to disappointing some people in order to be able to gain what you feel is peace of mind from within, that you're doing your best in the finite amount of energy and time you have in the service of your purpose. So that's focusing for us, having those, negotiations, in a tactful way, in a thoughtful way, sensitive way, making certain trade-offs, doing for others while still protecting and, serving your own interests in just the right way. It often is a very soul-searching phase of trying to understand your relationship with your family, with the community, your organization, and the world beyond. And then finally, the fifth stage after you get to focus is what I call fusion, and that is just such a wonderfully beautiful point to get to, where literally everything and anything that you're doing is being informed and guided and inspired by your purpose. And I give a couple of stories and examples in the book about how in even everyday small moments, you see these people who are fused with their purpose just automatically, instinctually finding a way to map their purpose to whatever it is that they were being asked to do in that moment. And so that's that stage, where, like I mentioned, this one mentor of mine was trying to help me with their triangle idea, that you progress from the base of the triangle where you're, fairly unstructured and, undirected, more gradually to more and more and more and more, and more focus, ultimately to that point at the very vertex of the triangle where you're completely fused.
I love it. I love it. And I love how you describe the five stages. And I'm curious, what are some of the common pitfalls, in your opinion, on that journey? Are there pitfalls everywhere? Are there certain ones? Is the number four hang most people up, or is it just it's the journey and it's everywhere? I'm curious if there are specific areas, or at least in your experience.
I respect that. One pitfall I shared, which I faced, was when I didn't really fully tune in to that stirring that was happening when I was 17. And, in its full force, it only came back to me when I doubled my lifespan. I was 20, 34 or so when it happened. So that's one pitfall, that we don't pay enough attention to our inner experience, to what our spirit is guiding and telling us. And we get so focused and engaged with just, and so comfortable and in some ways numbed by the pleasures of the of just the kind of the outer life and the affirmations we get from others, that we let time just go by. So that's one thing just to be cautious about and be mindful of, is like to pay attention to the inner experience. Another pitfall can be where you set yourself up with purpose, and you're a person of great ambition and drive, and so you focus a lot on quantitative purpose rather than qualitative purpose. You set big numbers for yourself, that I want to change the lives of 1 million people or 1 billion people or what have you. um, and the reason why that to me is a trap is because um, there are so many people who have had such meaningful lives and journeys on the basis of pursuing what you might call qualitative purpose. I mentioned in the book the story of two of them, and how they raised this foster this child as as foster parents, as adopted parents, and how this child ended up becoming this incredible human being. And now, who should the credit for that incredible human being go to? To himself for being that incredible human being, or in part to these two individuals who adopted him and nurtured him and sacrificed for him and guided him and all of that as well, shouldn't we also laud these two people for what it is that they were able to manifest and do? And so that's the idea of qualitative versus quantitative purpose. I mean, some of us are meant for quantitative things, and some of us are perhaps not meant, or there might be a chapter in our life where we are meant to do more qualitative rather than quantitative. And if we get very pushed and always are assessing our worth and our success with a purpose on the basis of the quantitative, then we sometimes can be very much limiting the choices and the fulfillment we can get from the very powerful transformative impact of the qualitative as well. So that's the second pitfall. And then the last one would be that I would offer is the one I was citing when I was talking about the power of saying no in focusing, which is that we don't say no. We feel like I'm seeking to be good. I'm seeking to manifest good in the world. So if you come to me and you ask me to contribute to your cause, I should, because that's a good cause. And then if you come to me and you want me to do this, or if I get pulled in that direction, or tomorrow the world has an emotional surge about this one thing, I should walk down that path too, and that path too, and that path too. And the thing is, like, when you try to be everything to everybody, at the end of the day, you're just not going to be able to be fully manifesting what it is that your unique gifts are. And that way, as an example, I have so much respect. It's somewhat controversial among some folks, but I have so much respect for Steve Jobs. He just focused on his purpose, and it was to bring in that kind of fusion of design and technology and simplicity in the world. And in some ways, all of us have been touched by it, whether it's through Apple products or beyond the design revolution. And at the same time, he didn't really care too much about the billions of dollars that he was racking up in his bank account, and he was going to leave it to posterity and his family perhaps to think about the right sort of philanthropy you can do with a couple of $1 billion, but or three or four or whatever it is. But I mean, at some level, that is chump change relative to the full impact he had by staying incredibly focused on his purpose, and even having the courage and clarity to say, like, even being a billionaire right now, I don't have time to think about the charity with my billions. That's for the future to decide. For now, I'm just going to keep working on my purpose.
And you mentioned Jobs. I also, in my head, hearing you say connecting the dots and the famous Steve Jobs commencement speech at Stanford saying you can only connect the dots looking backwards, not forwards, which is still one of my all-time favorite quotations from him. So in the book, you go, we went deep on purpose. You also go very deep on wisdom, growth, love, self-realization, but we're not going to go. I want people to pick up the book. um, and you close with transcendence. And you have so many great anecdotes in the book. And one of my favorites of all the people and all the places, you talk about transcendence. You tell a story about Elvis and Priscilla Presley visiting the Self-Realization Fellowship Lake Shrine in LA, which many people in our world know about. So you got to tell that story.
Yeah, it's a beautiful discovery, really, for me, and I'm so glad it resonates with you. It's a timely moment, isn't it? Because this biopic on like Elvis has just come out in the theaters. I'm actually planning to go and watch it. I haven't seen it yet. And as expected, from everything I understand from the buzz, it's focusing on his outer ambition and his outer success and his outer persona, that is obviously well known, well established, out there. But Elvis was harboring, very powerful inner hunger. And that chapter and aspect of Elvis's life is in some ways even more beautiful and luminous. Um, you know, Priscilla, as you mentioned, his ex-wife, she's observed. She said, like, he had been searching his entire life. He was convinced that his purpose was well beyond music and movies. And he told one of his co-stars, he said, I'm not a man, I'm not a woman, I'm a soul, I'm a spirit, I'm a force. And Self-Realization Fellowship, the organization started by Yogananda, as you mentioned, many of your listeners might be aware of Yogananda and this teaching of a yoga-based kind of, interfaith, invitation to really discover your full potential through a meditational practice and how to live in teaching. So they have, an active presence in the Los Angeles area. And Priscilla, she reflects and she mentions, she says, I have this very vivid picture in my mind. It's a very clear sunny afternoon in Los Angeles. Elvis and I on our motorcycles, roaring through Bel Air, down Sunset Boulevard, over the freeway, past Brentwood, into Pacific Palisades. And we stop at an idyllic retreat called Self Realization Fellowship Lake Shrine, which, by the way, is a beautiful place for those of us who haven't been to it. Really, really encourage a visitation, right? So then she says, Elvis takes my hand and leads me through the grounds. For a long time, we sit in the meditation garden and focus on our attention and our breath. And I've never seen Elvis this calm. And then he looks at her after a while and he says, "It's what we all need, a break from the craziness." And then I share a little bit more about how he later on went to the headquarters, Mother Center, also in the Los Angeles area of SRF. He met with the president there, befriended her. She's a very exalted nun, born Rachel Faye Wright, but then taking on the monastic name Dayamara, or like a mother of compassion. And they became really good friends, and she counsels him, from time to time, as he really gets stirred, with these inner deep hungers, and wants to really accelerate his spiritual advancement and take the teaching and then offer it to his fans. And she affirms that hunger in him and affirms the value of going on that path, but also slows him down and says, look, I mean, this requires practice, this requires discipline. It's not going to be something that you can just do overnight just because you're Elvis, which I admire you for, but it's going to take much more than that. And unfortunately and painfully so, he wasn't able to get there, right? And before he could actually maybe get to that path of discipline, the flame of life was extinguished right within him. But it's so beautiful to know about that inner Elvis, because it makes you realize we're all the same. We're all the same. We have this outer Elvis form to us that is hungering and pulled in various directions and wants to indulge and cruise and all of that stuff. And yet, we can't escape from that. Even Elvis couldn't. There was that purity and that questing for something deeper and that connection with spirit that, hey, if someone like Elvis could have it with all his indulgences and his successes and outer engagements, then like obviously all of us have it.
I love it. I love it. So, in closing, is there one thing that everyone, no matter where they are in their own journey, should do, could do, that would help them on their path to inner mastery?
We're living in complicated times, Jason, as you know, and sometimes from time to time it's really hard, to decide what's right, what's wrong, and what to do about my health or my service to my aging parents, or my financial decisions, or where we live as a couple, or whatever it is. And the thing is, I mean, science can take us some of that distance, but not often to a full place of clarity and insights about those questions. And experience can help us, but again, sometimes we really struggle with some of these choices. And similarly with faith, reading the scriptures can help, but at times there's something more we're looking for. And so the one thing I perhaps want to leave our listeners with is to really tune in and listen to your inner voice, because in some ways that is where the universe is offering its whispers to us. And the inner voice isn't just a an entitlement, isn't just a instant choice that we make, that, oh, okay, let me just listen to my voice, and this is what I feel compelled to, or moved to, or pulled by. Because really, that thing that you've been compelled to and pulled by, is that your inner voice, or is that really a compulsion or a habit or a desire or a hunger or an emotional surge or an attachment that you're experiencing in the moment, right? You've got to give all of that up before you earn the right to really fully tune in and listen to what that inner voice is saying. And so that's just a beautiful journey to go on, which is like, how do I connect more and more and more with the wisdom that resides at the very core of my being? And I'll just kind of end with the story. Vincent Sheehan, he was an American journalist, and he went to Gandhi. He was very inspired by Gandhi's, kind of offering that a lot of the hard decisions and calls he'd made, including in India's, independent struggle, very pivotal decisions that he made came from his inner voice, So he asked us, Mr. Gandhi, you talk about your inner voice, but many other people struggle with their inner voice. And some of them actually end up like listening to what they claim is their inner voice, but they go down some really dark paths and do really bad things. And so like, how can you trust it? Is it so that it's like first you have to confirm and know that it's the true voice, the true voice within, and then you surrender to it? Is that how you do it? You have to get to be really sure. And he says that Gandhi looked at me as though like, what? Like, did you completely misunderstand what it is that I've been, seeking to, offer and tell you about my philosophy? Because what you said is the complete opposite. He said, because Gandhi told me, he said in that moment, he said, it's the complete opposite. He said, it's not that you first have to be convinced that it's the right thing and then you surrender to it. It's that you first surrender and then you will know that it's the right inner voice that you're listening to, because it's in the act of surrendering, right? Surrendering our desires, our attachments, our need for a certain outcome, a view of a certain way to think about truth. I'm not going to entertain these ideas. I'm only going to entertain this, and whatever it is, it might be, that clutters our mind and creates a lot of noise within. When we can let all of that go, we get to that space of like pure silence, and that silence, allows our inner voice to break its silence. And that's just a beautiful place. And any or all of us get to it from time to time, and then we lose it. And some of us have systems and methods to get to it. So that would be my one encouragement to all of us, which is, hey, befriend that friend, that beautiful friend, right at the very core of your being. Listen to it, tune into it. But that requires, some discipline and some capacity to live with a state of surrender.
I love it. We'll close there. Hitendra, thank you so much.
Oh, I'm very grateful, Jason. This was soul stirring for me, and I wish all the best to our listeners, and very grateful to you for all that you're doing to bring voices like yours and listeners and folks like myself together.
Thank you.